Moving into a new town brought a mix of excitement and apprehension. The house across the street from mine looked ordinary enough, but as I settled in, I began to realize that the true horror lay hidden behind its seemingly innocent facade. My first encounter with the neighbors, the Petersons, was a friendly one. They welcomed me with warm smiles, offering to help with anything I needed. Mr. Peterson was a middle-aged man with a stoic demeanor, and Mrs. Peterson was a soft-spoken woman with a gentle smile. They had a daughter, Emily, who rarely ventured outside. In the weeks that followed, strange occurrences unfolded. Late at night, I would hear muffled cries and whispers drifting through my bedroom window. Initially, I dismissed it as my imagination, but the sounds persisted. The Petersons' house, though well-kept, exuded an eerie silence during the day. One evening, unable to resist my growing curiosity, I decided to take a stroll around the neighborhood. As I passed the Petersons' house, I noticed the curtains twitching, as if someone inside was watching me. A chill ran down my spine, but I convinced myself it was mere paranoia. Days turned into weeks, and the peculiar happenings escalated. My sleep became restless, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures lurking in the Petersons' yard. One night, as I peered through my window, I saw Emily standing in front of her house, staring blankly into the darkness. Her eyes held a vacant, unsettling gaze. Concerned for Emily's well-being, I decided to approach the Petersons and express my worry. When I knocked on their door, Mr. Peterson answered with a forced smile, insisting that everything was fine. However, the atmosphere inside their home felt stifling, as if secrets lingered in every corner. One stormy night, I awoke to the sound of frantic knocking on my front door. It was Emily, drenched in rain, her eyes wide with terror. She whispered hurriedly, explaining that something was terribly wrong in her house. Intrigued and alarmed, I followed her across the street. The Petersons' home, once a picture of suburban normalcy, now emanated an oppressive energy. The air was thick with an unidentifiable stench. Emily led me to the basement door, hesitating before unlocking it. As she swung the door open, a wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it a nauseating odor. Descending the creaky stairs, we entered a dimly lit room. What unfolded before my eyes was a macabre scene, walls adorned with disturbing paintings, candles casting flickering shadows, and a pentagram drawn on the floor. In the center of the room lay a small, lifeless animal. Mrs. Peterson, wearing a tattered gown, stood at the center of the pentagram, her eyes glazed over. She mumbled incoherent phrases as Mr. Peterson, donned in a hooded robe, chanted obscure incantations. My heart raced as I realized I had stumbled upon a ritual, a sinister gathering that defied all logic. Emily's presence had disrupted the ritual, and her parents turned toward us with a mixture of anger and despair. I grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the nightmarish scene. We raced back upstairs and out of the house, the storm intensifying as if nature itself mirrored the horror we had witnessed. In the days that followed, I reported the incident to the authorities, but investigations yielded no tangible evidence of wrongdoing. The Petersons denied any involvement in occult practices, painting me as a paranoid neighbor with an overactive imagination. Haunted by the ordeal, I decided to move away, leaving the unsettling memories behind. Yet, even in my new home, the image of that basement and the cold, vacant gaze of Mrs. Peterson lingered in my nightmares. The house across the street, once a symbol of suburban normalcy, became a chilling reminder that true horror can manifest in the most unexpected places. As a young student living alone in a small town near my university, I often found solace in the quiet routine of my daily life. My cozy apartment became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on my studies. The neighbors in the adjacent house were mostly elderly couples, and our interactions were limited to occasional nods and polite greetings. With the pressure of exams building up, I decided it was time for a break. I hadn't visited my mother in months, and the longing for her company grew stronger each day. The weekend finally arrived, and with an eagerness to see her, I packed my bags and headed to my hometown. The reunion with my mother was heartwarming, and the weekend passed in a blur of laughter and shared stories. However, as Sunday evening approached, a sense of melancholy crept in. Reluctantly, I bid farewell to my mother and embarked on the journey back to my apartment. Arriving late at night, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. The street was eerily quiet, and the dimly lit houses cast long shadows on the pavement. As I approached my apartment building, a sense of foreboding settled over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in my absence. Upon unlocking my front door, I noticed an odd stillness in the air. The usually ambient hum of my neighbors' activities was absent. My apartment felt colder than usual, despite the heating being on. I dismissed it as the product of a tired mind, attributing the unusual silence to the late hour. The next morning, I awoke to a sense of unease that lingered like a shadow. As I prepared for my day, I heard hushed whispers emanating from the walls, barely audible but undeniably present. It was as if the very structure of the building held secrets that were slowly unfurling in my presence. Curiosity overcoming my initial unease, I ventured out into the hallway to investigate. As I approached the door of my neighbor's apartment, the whispers grew louder. The voices seemed to be engaged in a conversation, their tone anxious and conspiratorial. Frowning, I knocked on the door, expecting to be met with the familiar faces of the elderly couple who had lived there for years. To my surprise, a middle-aged man opened the door, his eyes guarded and wary. He introduced himself as Mr. Jacobs, explaining that he had recently moved in after the previous occupants had vacated the apartment. Trying to ease the tension, I engaged in small talk, but Mr. Jacobs remained evasive. As I returned to my apartment, the whispers continued, weaving a narrative of secrecy and hidden agendas. The once familiar surroundings now felt like a maze of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Late at night, I would hear strange noises emanating from Mr. Jacobs' apartment, the clinking of metal, muffled footsteps, and occasional murmurs that seemed to echo through the walls. The unsettling feeling of being watched became a constant companion, and sleep eluded me, like a fleeting shadow. One evening, unable to endure the torment any longer, I decided to confront Mr. Jacobs. As I approached his door, I overheard snippets of conversation that sent chills down my spine. They spoke of me, mentioning details of my life that were known only to a select few. It was as if they had been observing me, studying my every move. Summoning the courage to knock, I was met with an eerie silence. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Mr. Jacobs with an expression that straddled fear and hostility. I questioned him about the strange occurrences, about the whispers that invaded my apartment. His response was cryptic, acknowledging the existence of secrets but refusing to divulge more. Frustration and fear gnawed at me as I delved into a relentless pursuit of answers. I reached out to the building management, but they claimed ignorance about any unusual activities in Mr. Jacobs' apartment. It seemed as if a veil of secrecy shrouded the entire situation, and my concerns were met with indifference. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to explore unconventional avenues. Late one night, armed with a flashlight and a sense of trepidation, I ventured into the building's basement. The air grew thick with dampness as I navigated through the dimly lit corridor, eventually stumbling upon a door that seemed out of place. Behind the door lay a room unlike any other. Walls adorned with strange symbols, flickering candles casting shadows that danced ominously. In the center of the room stood a figure, Mr. Jacobs, his eyes vacant, murmuring incoherent phrases that sent shivers down my spine. Surrounding him were several people, their faces obscured by hooded robes, engaged in an unsettling ritual. As my flashlight illuminated the scene, the room fell silent. The hooded figures turned toward me, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. Panic surged through me and I stumbled backward, fleeing the basement and locking the door behind me. The following day, I confronted the building management with the evidence of the secret ritual. Their reaction was one of disbelief, but a trace of concern flickered in their eyes. They assured me they would investigate the matter promptly. In the days that followed, the building management took action. Mr. Jacobs and his mysterious associates were swiftly evicted, their ritualistic chamber dismantled. The sense of relief was palpable, but the scars of the unsettling ordeal lingered, etched into the walls of my memory. As I resumed my studies and attempted to reclaim a semblance of normalcy, the whispers gradually faded away. The apartment building returned to its quiet routine, and new neighbors moved into Mr. Jacobs' former residence. Yet, the experience left an indelible mark, a reminder that sometimes true horror lies hidden in the most unexpected corners, waiting to unravel the tranquility of everyday life. Life in the quiet suburb of Crescent Falls was idyllic, or so it seemed. My friend Mark and I shared an old but charming apartment that exuded a sense of comfort and familiarity. Our neighbors were a mix of families and elderly individuals, and the neighborhood had a serene atmosphere that made it the perfect place to unwind after a hectic day of work and studies. Our peaceful existence took an unexpected turn one autumn evening. Mark and I were engrossed in a gaming session, the sounds of laughter and the glow of the screen illuminating our cozy living room. The night was uneventful, and the only disturbance was the occasional distant hum of traffic from the nearby streets. Around midnight, as we were about to call it a night, a sudden knock echoed through the apartment. Startled, we exchanged puzzled glances. It was unusual for anyone to visit us at this hour, especially given our unassuming lifestyle. Mark, always the adventurous one, headed to the door and opened it cautiously. To our surprise, our neighbor from the apartment next door, Mr. Thompson, stood on the threshold, his eyes conveying a mixture of fear and urgency. His hands trembled as he clutched a worn-out notebook. Mr. Thompson explained that he had been hearing strange noises coming from our apartment and felt compelled to share some unsettling details. He claimed that the previous occupants of our apartment had experienced similar disturbances and had left abruptly, leaving behind a trail of unexplainable events. Skeptical but intrigued, Mark and I listened as Mr. Thompson described eerie whispers and inexplicable shadows that seemed to manifest in the corners of our living room. He insisted that we were not alone in our apartment, that an unseen presence lingered, undetected, yet unsettlingly real. As Mr. Thompson leafed through the worn-out notebook, he pointed to entries detailing bizarre occurrences, objects moving on their own, chilling drafts in the dead of night, and faint echoes of distant laughter. The entries were dated, spanning several years, and they chronicled the eerie events that had driven the previous tenants to abandon the apartment. The idea of sharing our living space with an unseen entity left an indelible mark on our perception of the once familiar apartment. Despite our reservations, we decided to investigate the claims. That night, as we lay in our respective beds, an eerie silence enveloped the apartment. The shadows seemed to dance in the periphery of our vision, and the air felt charged with an unspoken presence. I dismissed it as a manifestation of my imagination, hoping that the unsettling stories were nothing more than the product of an overstimulated mind. Days turned into weeks, and the unexplained occurrences intensified. Mark and I would wake up to find furniture rearranged, and the faint echoes of distant whispers became a nightly ritual. Our once cozy haven transformed into a place tainted by an unseen force that seemed to feed off our fear and uncertainty. One night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to confront the entity. Armed with skepticism and a flashlight, I ventured into the living room, the silence pressing against my ears. As I scanned the room, my gaze fell upon a peculiar anomaly, a door in the corner that we had never paid much attention to. Opening the door revealed a small, dimly lit room. The air within felt heavy, as if weighted by the secrets hidden within its walls. The room appeared ordinary at first, containing only a few boxes and old furniture. However, as my flashlight flickered over the dusty surfaces, I noticed a peculiar detail. A series of faded drawings on the walls, depicting shadowy figures and distorted faces. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized that the room had been concealed from us. A secret space that harbored the unsettling history of our apartment. The drawings seemed to tell a silent tale of the unseen entity that had lingered for years, its presence undetected by the oblivious occupants. Alarmed, I called Mark into the room, and together we attempted to make sense of the bizarre drawings. It became evident that the previous tenants had tried to document their encounters with the entity, sketching the haunting figures that tormented their nights. The room, once hidden from our awareness, now stood as a testament to the unexplained events that had unfolded within the apartment's walls. Determined to understand the nature of the entity, we delved into research about the history of the building. It was then that we stumbled upon a newspaper article from years ago. The headline sent a chill down our spines. A tragic incident had occurred in our apartment, claiming the life of a previous tenant in circumstances that had never been fully explained. The article mentioned strange occurrences reported by neighbors and the subsequent abandonment of the apartment by those who had witnessed the unexplainable. It seemed that the entity we now grappled with had a history rooted in tragedy, and its spectral presence had lingered, undisturbed and unnoticed, for years. With newfound knowledge, we sought the help of a paranormal investigator. The investigator, armed with equipment designed to detect supernatural energies, explored the hidden room and the rest of the apartment. The air seemed to thicken as the investigator's devices registered anomalies, confirming the presence of an otherworldly force that defied scientific explanation. The investigator performed a cleansing ritual, invoking protective energies to dissipate the lingering entity. The process was accompanied by an eerie stillness, and the drawings on the walls seemed to fade into obscurity. The investigator assured us that the apartment was now free from the unseen entity's grasp, and the room, once concealed, would remain sealed off. In the aftermath of the cleansing, the apartment felt different. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the once unsettling whispers were replaced by a soothing silence. Mark and I, forever changed by the haunting presence we had unwittingly shared our home with, decided to leave the apartment behind. As we moved into a new dwelling, the memories of the unseen entity lingered, a chilling reminder that the boundary between the seen and the unseen is fragile. Our former neighbors, oblivious to the paranormal history of our old apartment, continued their lives in blissful ignorance, unaware of the unsettling force that had silently shared their living space for years.